My name is Keith L. Whitlatch, and at one time I was sheriff of Cedar County, which meant I was in charge of this jail here where we're at today. I'll give you a little rundown on my background. 3 years in the Marine Corps, 6 months I was a military policeman, and that's where I got my first taste of law enforcement. And then I got out of that and went to college here for a while at the University of Iowa, and I was working at a gamble store here in Tipton. And the day man, a Tipton police officer, they didn't call him police chief then, Clarence Gritton, come to me and asked me if I would be interested in a part-time job as a police officer, which I accepted. I enjoyed it. I'd work on the farm all day and go in and work as a cop all night. And I worked as a part-time officer. And then in 1965, they had an election, and the day man campaigned for the wrong person, and all of a sudden he's out of a job. And the new mayor was looking for somebody, and I was told by the city clerk, she said, if you apply for the job, you're going to get it. And I applied for a job as police chief and got it, and they named me police chief. And then I was in that line of work for 11 years. And I ran a couple times for sheriff, because the sheriff is the only elected position in the state of Iowa in law enforcement. And after the third try, the second try, the former sheriff, Dick Hancock, beat me by about 300 votes. And the next time I beat him about 300 votes, and I took office in January of '77 and remained as sheriff until the end of 1999. During that time, we had a lot of changes in law enforcement. One of the biggest changes in the jail, we had jail standards. Before, you just kind of hit or miss running it the way you wanted to. And we had standards that we had to apply, and so it becomes stricter operating a jail. And I'm often asked this question, did you ever live in the jail? And I said, yes, I lived here for about a month. And my wife says she didn't run for sheriff, and the job was getting more demanding for sheriff. There were just more things we had to do. And so I convinced him to hire civilians as jailers. And my first civilian jailer was a guy by the name of Chuck Hubble. And Chuck liked it so much, he later became a juvenile probation officer. But the jail was, as we pointed out, or as you saw earlier, it was built in 1892. And it ran until 2001. Basically the same building with a few modifications. But the jail was built after the house. It was an add-on. There's a walkway you can see out there later where you can see there's outside walls on the jail and on the house. And then that was closed in and covered up, so it was all it all looks like one building. But we've had some interesting times. One of the things we had, and I can expound on this a little bit later, but we had a jailbreak here, and at that time we were letting the prisoners roam all over the jail all night long. And after that happened, we tightened up the restrictions, and the prisoners were locked inside of the cage at 10 o'clock at night. So if by some chance they got a hacksaw blade, they couldn't saw their way out because they'd have to go through the big bars inside and then the outside bars. So it effectively stopped that. But then the regulations, you wrote down how often they checked on the prisoners and this type of thing. And if you had a prisoner of risk, then you had to check on them oftener. So I'm proud to say we never had a suicide or unattempted suicide on my watch as sheriff, but they have had some in the past. But we're sitting right now here in the living room. This is the living room of the sheriff's home. And just beyond me a little ways is another room that was a solid wall in there, and that was a downstairs bedroom. So they took that out, and I can't tell you when that was taken out. But that was taken out and made a bigger living room out of it. There are 2 small bedrooms upstairs, and the stairway is a unique stairway. It's a circular stairway going upstairs, and it's something to behold. But when I say the jailhouse, the house stopped just beyond this wall back here. You can show it. We'll show you later. And so the house wasn't that big. And then they added on the dining room out there. They added on a kitchen, but there's no basement under them. This part of the house has got a basement under it. And at 1855, it's one of the oldest houses in Tipton. And it stood the test of time. It's been renovated a couple times, but it's still basically what it was when it was built. We've got pictures. I don't know if we got any posters on the wall right now, but of when it was old-time jail. But now if you circle around in this room, you'll see several items. One item of interest, and this is the plaque of all the sheriffs and deputies that got killed in the line of duty. Now I might mention, looking at this plaque, that this is an official museum of the Iowa State Sheriffs and Deputies Association. They have one other one, and that's at Council Bluffs at the Squirrel Cage Jail. So the Sheriff's Association recognizes this. They get materials for it and help fund it. But around the walls, and you go on around, you'll see our uniforms hanging on the wall. You see what we wore. I think that's still the standard uniform. I haven't seen an officer wear a hat in a long time. But when I was sheriff, everybody wore their hat. Anyhow, that shows the patches, the hats, the summer and the winter hats, and it's a nice display of the uniforms. And right below the uniforms is a showcase, and I think it's got the duty belt at that time of a previous sheriff, and a few eyes in it. There's an interesting set of brass knuckles there that was given to me by a man southwest of Tipton, and it had been, somehow it got hung up in a tree, and the tree branch grew through it, and when he cut the tree down, he thought I might be interested in the brass knuckles, which I definitely was, and it became a permanent part of our display. But and I think we've got a picture of one of the former sheriffs. One of the goals I would like to get is pictures of every sheriff of Cedar County, but that may be impossible. But I've got sheriffs from mostly from this century. I mean, Elwood Hemingway, Charlie Willie, people like that. But now there are other pieces of equipment in here that aren't necessarily period equipment. We do have a modern TV set over there, and we can play some videos we have with interviews of two of the previous sheriffs, Dick Barden and Jack Leverance. And we also have a video that I done with our most famous alumni, a prisoner by the name of Franny McQuillan. And Franny was probably in here more times. And Franny's problem was when he was in here, he was a model prisoner. But up here, just up the corner here, was a tavern. And as soon as he would get discharged from serving time in here, he headed right for the tavern. And he didn't get arrested right away, but he arrested numerous times. And but when he got older, he had a leg amputated. We built a ramp for him, and then I got the interview from him. So that's why there's a modern piece of furniture over there, a TV set. But above the TV set is pictures from Dick Hancock is in that picture, the sheriff that preceded me. And I can't quite see what's on that south wall there, but then they had a lot of interesting cases that they dealt with, and they put pictures of them. Later we'll get to a picture over here showing the old jail, but they had one person that walked the river or across the river bridge in Cedar Bluff, and every time he walked across, he would see something in the river, a stolen safe or something. So we finally told him, "Quit looking down." But on the south wall here is a article from the Cedar Rapids Gazette telling about the family that called the jailhouse home. They were I call them the first modern sheriff, because Jack Leverance and his deputy Dick Barden were the first ones to wear a full uniform. Table here that we're looking at right here, I'll point at it here, was made by the prisoners, and those are all wooden matchsticks in there. And they put them in there together, glued them in, and made them as a gift to Sheriff Jack Leverance. And we acquired about a year ago. The sheriff's son had it, and he donated it to us for the jail, and it's quite a treasure. I can't speak highly enough. It's probably one of the gems in here, because it's a dedication and of doing that. But you just, I don't know how many thousand matchsticks that would take. You can feel the texture of the matchsticks. The tabletop is not a smooth texture. It's a little bit rough. It's because of the matches being glued in there together. On this east wall, you got some more pictures, and these will be some pictures of the old jail, older jail, when it was old. I mean, you can see it hasn't changed much really. You can see the overhead pictures. You can see of it, and along with the jail, there's a outdoor garage and an old woodshed. It's kind of a unique old building, because when this jail was built, it was heated with wood and or coal, and so they had the woodshed. And I would imagine that it was the duty of the prisoners to keep the stove stoked in the back in the cell block area, because if they didn't, they were going to get cold. So they had to keep it stoked. Tells the story somewhat in here even. The sheriff always lived here. I think once in a while was a deputy, but they had radios out here, And during my time, it was before we had the courthouse when I started as police chief. And if you called in any time at night, they wouldn't not be anybody in the sheriff's office. That was just an 8 to 4 job or 8 to 5. And you would call in, and the sheriff here would answer the radio and tell you what they needed. You know, if somebody needed the sheriff at night, they called the number. The phone was answered here. Well, if they were in this bedroom here, it wouldn't be too far. Out in the living or dining room, I'll show you where they had their radio set up later. But they would answer the phone, and then radio you to tell you what they needed. Now, as a side note to that, the city of Tipton also had a radio, and it was on their own frequency. And when I was police chief, well, we used that. But if you call in for the police department at night, it rang into the funeral home. So the funeral director had to get up, walk over to the radio, turn it on. It was the old station radio, and you could hear it clicking when he turned it on, give you a message, whatever it was, and then you would respond to whatever the call was. He'd shut the radio off and go back to bed. So your two-way response was not real good. We were able to reach statewide radio. At that time was up in Maquoketa, but that was a very little help. And we had, well, as you'll see a picture later I can show you, but one sheriff and one deputy. And then they increased that to one sheriff and 2 deputies. They really went wild. And when I became sheriff in '77, we had one sheriff, 2.5 deputies. And if you wonder how you can have a half deputy, we had one deputy that lived in Loudon, and he was half-time deputy and half-time Loudon police. But for a long time, we just run with 3 deputies, and he finally became full-time. And I don't know now, what's 14, 15, something like that, deputies. But so times are changing. I might mention one other thing about the jail. We had to, one of the things you had to do was a jail check every hour. Well, at that time, we just had a jailer, a civilian jailer, and his wife living in the jail, so you couldn't expect them to be on 24 hours a day. And so to do the hourly jail check, sometimes the deputy or myself would come in and do the check, or one of the Tipton police officers, so we could meet the requirements of the 24-hour check. And then it reached a point that wasn't working out, so then we started hiring shift workers or jailers. Civilian jailer lived upstairs in the jail here, or the house, but they had people that would come in as jailers, relief jailers, and worked around the clock. So it was pretty well covered. It just, the things changed dramatically during the time I was sheriff. It just got better, I guess, in a sense, but yet it wasn't perfect. Before they had jail regulations, the sheriff and or deputy would see the prisoners 3 times a day when they fed them. And beyond that, the prisoners could do just about anything they wanted to in the jail because nobody checked on them, and they knew what time mealtime was, so they could act accordingly. But it changed then, and they put in an intercom system that was supposed to help, and you could monitor what the prisoners were saying. Well, the prisoners, of course, knew what time the family would be eating supper or any meal, and so they put added entertainment on there for mealtime. It wasn't always enjoyable, but but that was the jail check. Now the jail after that, we had it every hour, and then we had, if we have a prisoner that might be considered suicidal or something, we have to watch them every 15 minutes. And if they're really suicidal, we would have an extra jailer come in, and they would just sit there and watch them, stare at them while we had them, because we didn't want any chance of that happening. Now, come back to this room here. The case right here in front of me shows a picture of Foster Maxson, who was sheriff from 1931, 1932. And he was a one-term sheriff. Now, some of the interesting things in here are, of course, obviously the old ticket book we had, and some different holsters, speed loaders, and there's the brass knuckles with the tree still through it. Back in the corner, you'll see a Cedar County Sheriff office, and that was the one they would put on the prisoners with their number.
The Tipton PD ran on a different frequency.
Tipton PD had their own, but they had to go to the 3710 channel, which was if they wanted to communicate with the sheriff's office. In the squad car, you had to change channels. If you wanted to talk on the Tipton channel, then that would reach the city hall and everything, but nobody else could hear you. Now, our first walkie-talkie was about as big as a shoebox, and then you got them down inside. Now I think you probably got a cell phone on your wristwatch. But
yeah, whenabouts did you start carrying portable radios or having portable radios?
Oh, I had one when I was still police chief in 74, 75, somewhere in there. And then somewhere in later 70s, we started getting these radios like this that were a lot smaller. But it would have been somewhere in the 70s.
I was thinking, you're telling me before, as far as communication went, is there something with like a light?
Well, yeah, there was a light that could be turned on. The person, well, you called in, you'd still be calling into the, in this case, you called into the telephone office. They were answering our calls. And if they needed the police, then they would hit that switch, turn the red light on, and then you would drive over to the telephone office and see what they needed. So it was a time delay thing. It wasn't an instant response. But yeah, there was a red light up by where the stoplight is now, and you were supposed to check that periodically. And I talked to one of the telephone operators that was involved on the other end of it, and she told me that was true. You know, I'd heard the story, but she said that was fact, that you had to turn that red light on to get your call, because everybody was asleep. But it's amazing how we have progressed now. Of course, we didn't have ambulances at that time. The funeral home was the ambulance service, which is basically a horizontal taxi. They didn't provide any emergency care. The fire departments, of course, have been around for a long time. Yeah, when we established the 24-hour radio watch, I think it would have been about that time we were starting to get portable radios. But I thought they worked good, other than West Bryan Center down in the hole. But you could call from your portable radio to the sheriff's office and they could hear you. But and now, of course, then when the cell phones first come out, they were a big cumbersome thing, and you had to have a antenna on your car to make it work in the car. And the cell phones have taken dramatic changes. Of course, I'm looking back 60 years ago or so. But the first cell phone I had was, again, probably about 10 by 12 and 4 inches thick. That was a cell phone. And you took it out when you weren't in the car, and in the car you plugged it into the antenna. So communications is one of the things has greatly improved in law enforcement.
What about response times to calls? If you had like a serious call that it was an emergency, what would be the typical response time, and how has that improved?
Yeah, well, you had one deputy on, and then by the time I started, we had 2 deputies, but you had one deputy work day and one deputy work nights, and they didn't work 12-hour shifts. So if you needed a deputy at, say, 4 o'clock in the morning, the officer would call the deputy, and he would get dressed and then go out and respond to the call. And sometimes the highway patrol would help us out. Now, they had 24-hour service highway patrol, and I think they had way more highway patrolmen then than they do now. So there was usually a highway patrolman somewhere in the area. Now, he might have been down on Interstate 80 patrolling down there, but he would have taken some response time. So, yeah, you think about some of the calls now, whether it's law enforcement, ambulance, if you called for an ambulance in those days and you got the funeral home, and the funeral home come and probably load you on the cot they use in the funeral home and transport you to the hospital. And so their response time was horrible. I listened to the radio today on law enforcement and fire department, and if they don't respond within 3 minutes, they start to call somebody else. And it sounds strange, but that was the way it was. So regardless of the nature of it, you would have slow response time. And it started getting better when we had 24-hour dispatchers. At least we had the information come in quicker, people could receive it and they could call you. But for years, we didn't have enough officers to go around the clock. And now I'm sure you got somebody on all the time. But you're still, this is a county 24 miles square. And if you're in the southwest corner, if you're in West Branch and they need help in Loudon, there's no good way to get from West Branch to Loudon in a hurry. So you're still a period of time, and some of the towns had their own police officers. Loudon, as an example, I mentioned earlier, we shared a deputy with Loudon. He was a half deputy. He lived in Loudon, and so people thought he was on call all the time, so they would just call his house if they wanted something, and that didn't make him real happy. And so response time was horrible. But I can't recall any serious incident that occurred because of response time. I don't. And I don't remember. There's probably people that died because of inadequate medical service, but I'm not sure of that. I did, while I was police chief, I was in charge of the Tipton ambulance for several years, so I've had ambulance experience with that. And we had 24-hour coverage, and so I've had different experiences besides the sheriff. I was ambulance director 2 different times, and now I'm retired, but my wife is still on the ambulance in Mechanicsville, so I can listen to her portable radio and I can hear what's going on.
Just going back to that Foster Maxon, You said that he just served one term, but I see the dates are January of 31 to December of 32. So to me, were the terms shorter then?
Term was 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah, you had to run every time, yeah. And I can't tell you exactly when that changed, but sometime after that, obviously, and it was 4 years by the time that I became sheriff, and it would have been 4 years before that. So what they did was they would rotate. 2 years with sheriff, and then the next chief deputy would come in, and he would be sheriff, and then rotate back and forth. So it was kind of a gentleman's agreement. But we're sitting here now in the dining room of the old house, and this wall right behind me was solid because this room and the kitchen beyond us are added on, and there's no basement under them. It's strictly a crawl space. So this was, now when this was built, of course the house was built, now I don't know when this addition was put on, but it was before the jail. And this door we see here today was a boarded up window. And to get into the prisoners, through the kitchen there's a door, and down the hallway in there. We put this door in when we had to have 24-hour dispatchers, or 24-hour jailers, and they had a little jail office right in this corner cut out of the living room. And so that's when that door was put in and made it easier. So a lot handier, but it was the original building, that was a window. And then when the jail was built, it was boarded up. Why, I'm not sure, but so we got a lot of interesting things in this room, and I'll try to run around them in no particular order, but since this desk I'm sitting at was a desk that was here in the jail, and when one of the previous sheriffs moved out, he took the desk and the chair with him. And his sons later gave it to us, so I'm sure that many of the old sheriffs sat in this chair. And he was mentioning about a radio system. There used to be a counter about 5 feet high here, and that was where the radios set on it for the point-to-point and the radio, all 3710, all radio frequencies were right on there. Now the paintings on the wall was created by the prisoners back in the 1970s. These paintings here are the only ones that are suitable to show the public. We've got a lot of other paintings they've done, but some of them are obscene and just not real presentable. Here behind me now, here is the ledger book, all the prisoners incarcerated here. Back in, that's 67, 66. You get some of the, here was a day in December. Defrauding innkeeper, drunk driving, intoxication, forgery, driving license suspended, speeding, drunk driving. It's an interesting note that somewhere in here you'll see one of the major crimes was stealing chickens, which may happen again now with the price of eggs. But so the sheriff's office was nice to give us those books. So just looking through the book, it would be one of my first drunk drivers I got was in 1766, and that's the officer was 16.5, and that was me. 16.5 was the call number for tipping police. might mention that all of Cedar County is number 16, and all of the officers, there was a 16 prefix beyond their numbers. We went through the call numbers from 16-1 up to 9 and then 10, and then we had to jump always up to the 30s. Yeah. Yep. So that's pretty much this wall. You'll spin on around. I guess I'd have to say somewhat that maybe this is my bragging wall, because it tells a lot of things that I have done. One of the interesting stories down here on this lower corner is former county sheriff restores jail, and I head up the project. I'm president of operating the jail as a museum. And when I was still sheriff, and we tried time and time again to get a new jail, I was often quoted as saying the old jail would make a nice parking lot. I wanted to knock everything down and level it. Kind of the pictures in that one there. My brother was assistant police chief for Tipton, and I was police chief, and that's my brother in the middle, kind of pleased with that. And then some of the other pictures they've just put in there, I had draft horses for a year, and I went up there with that. We're shown with a prisoner. That's one of the times you're going to see me outside without a hat on, but that person robbed a bank. I think we've had 4 bank robberies here since I can remember, and all 4 were captured. So I think I like that as an impressive record. You move over here, and there's the Gold Star magazine, and I got a picture on the front page once, and a story about what I'm doing. You go on up above is a picture of me and Dick Barden, who was sheriff here from 65 to 75, and now deceased, of course. And up above, straight up above there, is you'll see a picture of William and Franny Christian. William Christian, they called him Bill, was the sheriff that presided over an execution of a man that killed the only deputy or only peace officer in Cedar County history. And I can touch on that a little more. We've got another story on that on the other page. But you get a picture up above up there, again, of the old jail, and it hadn't changed much. At that time, there was a sally port or carport there to take the prisoners into the jail. Down below that is the Sheriff Jack Leverance and Red Ivory. Red was on the board of supervisors, and at one time we were buying used cars. They were fleet cars from a Dodge dealership. We didn't get into the white ones with the stripes much later, but that's a good picture of Jack Leverance as the sheriff, and then the other just a campaign or a front page of when I got reelected. But that pretty well covers that side of the wall. So we got a bunch of pictures here on this wall of one current sheriff and several former sheriffs. Starting here would be Danny Hannes. He was the sheriff for 7 years. He followed me. He was my chief deputy for years, and he was been in law enforcement since '74. Now deceased, of course. Above that is Dick Barden, who was sheriff from '63 to '72, and he was one of the first sheriffs in Iowa to fly an airplane. And I think he's sitting in his plane right there. But he had been in, not in the war, but he had been in the war. He was a prisoner of war over in the Philippines in World War II. He was a civilian contractor working over there. So he left quite a storied life. Now you go to the next picture, the top left up, or top center, is Elwood Hemingway. Elwood was sheriff, back up, Elwood was deputy sheriff for many years. And then when the sheriff at that time, a man by the name of Charles Willie, retired, Hemingway became the sheriff. And you can see there he's wearing a partial uniform. Then you go right below him is Dick Hancock, and he was the sheriff that I defeated, but Dick was sheriff for 2 terms. And then you go on up again to the upper right-hand corner, clear up there, you'll see Dick Hancock and Dick Barden, and they are both dressed in the full uniform at that time. Those were the first 2 to have a full uniform. And then down below the picture of the 2 of them is Warren Wethington, the current sheriff, and he also flies an airplane. And then there's a campaign poster there for Dick. And right here, and I'll open it, we'll go out there later, is the door to the jail. This is the way we go out to the jail. So you can see out there, there's the hallway out there, and you get out there, you'll see that there's brick walls on both sides. So it was an open passageway at one time. And there's a few bits of memorabilia right over there that are from a former Sheriff Bud Stroud from another state. Since we're the official museum, we try to get things from other places, and if people want to donate them somewhere, we will gladly take them because it's interesting items. Back in 1930, we had a deputy sheriff, I guess they would call him. They were called vigilantes, or it'd be a special deputy today. And he was shot in the line of duty while they were trying to they stopped a car and then robbed a drugstore in Davenport. Now in those days, the sheriff, it was just the sheriff and the deputy, and I don't know where the deputy was that day, but the sheriff got the message that his car was coming in from the east. And he went and called on the town constable and also one of his reserve deputies, a man by the name of Robert Sproat. And the 3 of them went out east of town and they found the car, and they made the mistake then, and it's poor police work today. They stopped in front of the car that they wanted stopped, and then they got out, and through it's almost a comedy of errors, but it's tragic. One gun was not loaded and one misfired, but ultimately one of the bad guys, a guy by the name of Jack Mercer, shot and killed Bob Sproat. And then they escaped, headed north, got up by Wald, which is a whistle stop on the train line, went east, and that road's got a couple of curves, and they put their car in the ditch. Now there was a farmer there working there along the road, and they talked to him and they said, we need to get this person to the hospital, he's injured. And the one guy had been bloodied up in the accident. And so he was a good Samaritan, and they got him in the car, and he quickly realized that there was more to it than he thought, but he was with them then. And they went up and they stopped at a park up outside of Dubuque and threw some papers out of the car, and then went on. They went into East Dubuque, where they separated, gave him $1 or $2 for gas money, and told him not to talk to anybody for an hour. So he waited for an hour and then reported where he was at, because they had a manhunt all over the area looking for their car. And of course, they didn't find their car up there in the ditch till later. But they went on. When he talked to the police, he told them about stopping in that park and throwing out papers. They went back there, the police checked on that, and papers on one of them was identified one of the people as a Wayne Kyle. And so now they knew who they were looking for. They got information back to Ohio where Wayne Kyle lived, and he was arrested. And he was the first one of them arrested, and he was brought here and incarcerated here in jail. Well, then the killer was Jack Mercer, Jack or John, and his brother, and it escapes me right now what the brother's name is. But anyhow, the brother was never located. We got various reports that he might be dead, but we didn't know. John Mercer got caught in I believe it was 35 or 36. He out in California, and the way that he got caught was he was taking people's radios to fix them, and then he would keep them and sell the radios. And one lady that he done that to was upset about it, and she saw him one day on a bus when she was riding on the bus, and she got a hold of a police officer and said, "That's the man that stole my radio." So he was originally arrested for stealing a radio, and then when they checked on him, they found out he was wanted for murder back here in Iowa. And so the sheriff and a state agent went out and brought him back. And contrary to what some people think, he wasn't incarcerated in this jail. He was put in the state penitentiary because they felt he was too big a security risk. People were real upset. The vigilante that got killed was a prominent businessman running a grocery store in town, and so they were upset about it. But he went to trial, and before they had the trial, he pled guilty. And I'm not sure yet why he pled guilty, because he didn't get any breaks, but guilty of first-degree murder because they were carrying guns with them when they came from robbing a drugstore in Danbury, but when they shot him. And so there was a trial for him, and but he never went to trial, and then sentenced to hang. And the sheriff at that time, Bill Christian, was the executioner. And he went down to the prison, I believe it was 1937, and he and another guy were hung down there, but Sheriff Christian's the one that actually pulled the lever to drop him down through the hole. I mean, he was executed. His body was taken by a lady from, a Quaker lady from West Branch, and he is buried in a grave on her private property down by West Branch. So, and since then, we have had, on Ragbri one year, I think they have a police officer riding in Ragbri that will honor some fallen officer. And we got up here on this wall here is a picture of and I believe it was actually the officer's wife that carried the banner for the Robert Sproats, in honor of Robert Sproat being killed. Now, since that time, I've also got a marker put up out east of town where the murder occurred. So he got his Robert Sproats marked. That's about all I can say on Robert Sproat. He was a fascinating person. But he was a veteran of the Spanish-American War and had all kinds of gun experience with guns. But for some reason, the gun he had wasn't loaded and made the fatal mistake. Now, when they had a hanging, they had to have 10 or 12 witnesses from the jurisdiction where he was from. So this one picture up here shows it says cast of characters. Well, that's Lloyd Meyer. He was one of the witnesses. But I'll start the top one first. And Sheriff Charles Willey, he was one of the previous sheriffs. He's actually the first sheriff that I knew. We moved to Cedar County in 1950, and Willey was the sheriff then. He's the first one that I didn't know him personally, but I knew who he was. And we got people cut out. They gave us his badge, and then we cut out pictures and made a post out of that. Now we moved down below there, and these are articles out of the tips of the paper, and they have since done another story on him, but Frank Carpra was the man's name. And he was arrested and given a 70-year sentence, but before he was sent anywhere for his sentence, he broke out of jail. He first broke out of the courthouse. Actually, he wasn't in jail at that time, but he went into the restroom when he was up at the courthouse and crawled out a window and escaped. And then he, you can see down here in the lower corner, it'll show the small window that he crawled out of. And then he was put in, and this time he escaped physically from the jail. Second escape, he was all over the county, and in fact, he stole a bicycle out of a shed. Most of the people didn't know what he looked like, and so when he was doing a manhunt, he at one point even joined the group looking for him. And they finally got him and put him away this time, but he was one of the more notorious escape artists. Well, we're sitting right here now. We're in part of the main jail. I always call it a vestibule because all the prisoners were brought in through here. Now, they were actually booked, printed and everything up at the courthouse, the sheriff's office. But when they were brought down here, we may get their heights, and they got right behind me is a height chart. We could tell their heights. But this is the area. Now, all the prisoners come through here. Right behind you is a gun locker, and the officers bringing a prisoner in will have a key to the outside, and they will put the gun in there. So there was never any guns in here. So even if a prisoner, for some reason, overpowered a deputy, they would not get his gun because they weren't in here. And I think that solved a lot of problems. Off to my right, it was the women and juvenile cell, not both at the same time, one or the other. And it was just 2 bunks when I became sheriff, and we added 4 because we had more prisoners. But that was not a real secure place. We had a prisoner, a juvenile, escaped through there once. He must have been pretty agile because to get up through the hole there, which was covered up above with plywood, but he got through there and shoved the roof back and got out. We call it the women and juvenile, but normally it was used as an overflow for male prisoners. We had a holding cell up at the sheriff's office, and usually females were kept up there. And then jail regulations were such that you couldn't keep juveniles anymore in the same building, really, as the male prisoners. So even though we had pretty much a soundproof door there, they didn't want the prisoners conversing or talking back to the forth with the juveniles. So that was the juvenile cell, but in later years it was overpowering with the prisoner number. We used it for prisoner overflow. The legal capacity of the jail was 4 in here, and we'll go back into the cell block 8, but there was one with 4 beds and one with 2, so we had 6 and 4. Our legal capacity, we had beds for 10, but our legal capacity was 9 because we didn't have enough square footage back there. And so it became a game of, kind of a chess game of moving the prisoners around to meet the requirements. The 2 cell went back there, and we'll see when we go back there more, has a toilet in here, so we can lock the door so they're locked in that. The 4-person cell, the door has to be left open to give it enough square footage to utilize all 3 of the 4 bunks. And in this one here, we can utilize 4, but only on a short term. If you'll notice in here, they have a toilet, but there's nothing else. And if the prisoner required a shower, then we'd either have to chase all the men outside in the yard, or you'll see behind the door there, I think there's a toilet. Also on the door, you'll notice there's a pass-through for food, so that when the door is shut and secured, you can still feed them. Come around here, and these pictures are not really germane to the jail, but this person here probably put more people in here while I was sheriff than anybody else. This was the famous silver bullet, Donovan Wright, and one time a trucker's magazine named him, I can't say public enemy, but he was the #1 trooper that they didn't like clear across country. But that's a picture donated by his son, and those are his last boots. And there's a scrapbook telling about one of his more famous cases. But he was a good man. He even wrote his own mother a ticket. But that's pretty much it. The prisoners, in theory, never got beyond this door. But I mentioned earlier a little bit about our #1 prisoner was Franny McQuillan, and Franny, when he was in jail here, was a model prisoner, and they used him to, well, actually used him for a babysitter. And if the sheriff be out going somewhere, he was a babysitter looking after their kids. But one night, the sheriff and the deputy, they were all out, and they went to the country club, and the sheriff said, Franny, I know there's nothing in here for you to drink, so you're safe. But he opened the refrigerator and found a bottle of home brew. And he drank half of that. So he figured, boy, I'll be in trouble if they find out I drank some. So he filled it up with water. The next day, he was taking the garbage out, and there was that empty bottle. And he mentioned it to the sheriff, and he said, yeah, after we got back, we had a few drinks here. And Franny laughed at him and said, yeah, it was half water. But we've got a tape video in there on Franny McQuillan, so it's an interesting thing to watch. He was a character, you know, and unfortunately his lifestyle was such that he lost a leg, and that's when I was taking his picture, done an interview with him. We had built a handicap ramp, and but he probably, you know, some of them I won't use their name necessarily, but Franny, never mind, he's proud of what he done. And at one time, he was probably the toughest man in Cedar County. And he liked to fight. Ooh, yeah. So, I don't know who your tough ones are today. Okay, I'm sitting right here in the entryway into the jail proper. There's a double door system here that when we had, after we had some contraband smuggled in, why we changed our visiting policy, and these doors were both shut, and this be a no man's land where they couldn't exchange any items. But behind me is a cell block area. One cell holds 2 prisoners and one holds 4. And we've also got 2 fold-down cells in there. Now our legal capacity was 9, but at times we would have 12, 15 prisoners in here. And the jail inspector was all right with that. If the prisoners come in overnight, he didn't expect us to wake up some of our good prisoners and send them somewhere else. But I had to make sure that we were at the minimum number at 4 o'clock in the day. And but we have had many. At one time we had a group of illegal aliens, and we had them all over the floor. I mean, we just had a bunch of them, and most of them wanted us all sleep in one bunk together. But the jail is made of heavy steel. It got windows on it, which somebody in their stupidity had taken the windows off, the window guards. So it made it easier for attempting escapes. However, the one escape we had, and we showed in there earlier, of Frank Carpa, he had somehow got a hacksaw blade, cut the lock on the door, and when the sheriff come in to feed him, he pulled the door on him and brought him in here and escaped that way by overpowering the sheriff and then getting out and running. So it was an interesting experience. And then part of this cage here that's behind me here came out of the old jail in Clarence, Iowa. So we've got a piece, and I can't tell you where the jail's set up there. But at the time, I call him our better known prisoners. We had a man by the name of Richard Waterloo Jr. I think that's his name right. But his girlfriend brought him in a carton of cigarettes, and that time we were allowing smoking in jail, which we later stopped also. But carton of cigarettes, and in that were some hacksaw blades. And I don't know if there was 2 or 3, but since we were not holding checks every hour on the hour at that time, it was early in '77, it was early in my career, they could work all night. And so this Richard Waterloo was sawing on the bars, and he had other prisoners helping him. And one prisoner broke a hacksaw blade. And Jarvis supposedly told him, or Waterloo, I mean, that if you break that hacksaw blade, another hacksaw blade, I'll kill you. They sawed out the bars back there so that they had an opening 12 by 12. Now that's a pretty small area. You go through a 12 by 12, jagged edges to boot, and then about 3 to 4 feet off the ground, so you weren't like you were laying down sliding through a hole. So I visualized the other prisoners had to pick him up and kind of push him through the hole. And but he was a slender build, and then a prisoner went with him by the name of Darrell Plumley. They didn't come in together, they didn't stick together after they got out, but they just escaped. Plumley was caught a couple days later. Jarvis, also known as Waterloo, Richard Jarvis, he used both names, stole a semi-tractor from a man in Durant, southeast of here, and I'm not sure how he got down there. And the truck had the name painted on the sides, Ed Horseman Trucking. Our prisoner operated that truck cross country for several months, operating as Eddie Horseman Jr. Eddie Horseman only had daughters, but he finally was caught in Chicago, and I and one of the deputies went in and got him and brought him back. And then he tried to escape again by we put storm windows on the inside of the jail to make it warmer, and he took the part of the stick that held the storm window together and pointed it with a knife, and it must have been a table knife because he wouldn't have had access to a pocket knife, and was going to stab the jailer with that, but that was thawed and he didn't get out. So he eventually went to prison and was on federal charges with the truck stealing, and he ended up at a federal prison in Wisconsin. And 4 days before he was to get out of prison, he took off and run. And I never heard again if they found him or not, but you kind of visualize why would a person got 4 days to go escape. But that was one of our more illustrious or famous prisoners. The bars have been welded up. If you'll notice when you look at that, there are 2 sets of bars that have been cut. Prior to the time that I was the sheriff, there was another prisoner that had done the same thing, cut 4 bars out and escaped. And he was recaptured. I believe he was in here for stealing hogs, but I'm not sure. But so we've had 2 escapes out of that window. And if you look at the window and you see it, you'll be able to see that there's no way possible one person can crawl out that window all by himself when it's 3 to 3.5 feet above the floor. But and there was other prisoners in here when Jarvis got out. But those are some of the main things in here. We haven't had any other escapes. Our biggest problem was overcrowding, and that's why we eventually built a new jail. We had a bond issue 3 times and it failed. And I wanted to put the jail next to the courthouse, which would have been so much handier, but the public didn't like that idea of having a jail next to the courthouse, so we gave in and had the bond issue for jail south of town, and the jail and the sheriff's office were both moved down there. But and that's when I was getting out of frustration and said, this would make a good parking lot. Now, one other thing you'll notice inside of here is on the wall there is pictures of every sheriff in Iowa. And that needs a little updating now. I think a couple of them have retired, but that's in here. We got a mock-up over there just for the kids with with the sheriff and a prisoner, you know, they can stick their heads in there and get pictures. But the door behind me, not immediately behind, but the door to the cell block area was closed every night at 10 o'clock. Not much more. I mean, you can see this is built solid.
So you've got the door going out to the old exercise area, right? And I remember there being that chain link fence going around that exercise area with barbed wire. But looking at old pictures, I don't think that was always set up that way.
No, the exercise area for the jail was right south of here. It covered this whole area south of here. And but the problem with that was the grass bottom. And I told the supervisors, if we have to let them outside for exercise, we're going to put a concrete floor so we can see if there's any contraband thrown in there. Because we've had contraband thrown into the grass here, and it's harder to detect it. And so we put in the concrete floor. Now, we were shut down briefly because we didn't have an outside door. This was the only way in and out. So we got an outside door and put it in, and where they said we had to put it, we took out a window and put in a door, but I couldn't visualize how you get an ambulance stretcher through that door. It was easier, this wasn't real good, but it was easier this way. But we put the door and then we reopened it, so that's about the only modification to the jail. And then we added making this handicap accessible for people to see it. We put a handicap ramp out here, and we got a jail wagon stored under the top out here. That's it was my brother and I owned it, and we agreed that when whoever died first, the other one got it, and when the last surviving brother died, it'd go to the jail. So it will be jail property. But
so historically, with the escapes, the hacksaw was used. So I know you got a display there depicting a cigarette carton. How do you know, like, how hacksaw blades were passed into inmates for that?
They purchased hacksaw blades at a local hardware store in town. We run that down. And a hacksaw blade is just about the length of a carton of cigarettes. And at that time we were letting the prisoners smoke, and they could have a carton of cigarettes, you know, and no problems. And we weren't checking them when they come in. So I don't know how the first guy did. It was before I was sheriff, but I know he got the hacksaw blades. His girlfriend got them. And at that time, prisoners could come right up to this door on the inside, and you could stand there and you could reach out and touch each other. And so she just handed him the cigarettes. Well, after that, we got smarter, and we shut this door, and the prisoner had to stay on the other side of that, and shut this door. And then we also, including that, we also had a jailer or a deputy sitting right here to watch him the whole time. So it was, we doubled up the security, but it was just lax. But yeah, they bought we checked with the local hardware stores, and they bought them down here at Peterson Hardware here in Tifton. Yeah, we've got an interesting story about an alumni here. It was a guy that was driving a Cadillac back for his father from Michigan to California. And he got stopped on the interstate, and I'm sure it was Donovan the way he described me, but he said a county deputy, but it matched Donovan's. And he was brought in here and incarcerated, and he was told that the next day he would see a judge. And the next day he got out of here, but he mentioned about he said the deputy's wife fed him and the horse. It's quite an interesting little story sideline.